The scale of this storm was truly remarkable. How are you feeling now that it has largely passed? Because there were many concerns going into this of massive power outages, and I know we have hundreds of thousands, but there were great memories, difficult memories of what happened, for instance, the ice storm in Texas in 2021. We seem to have avoided stories like these.
Thank you so much, Joe, for talking about this today, because I think it's important for people to understand that we did get through this storm really well. And I want to take a minute and thank the National Weather Service forecasters who worked around the clock. And they are still short-staffed. I want to thank all of the first responders, the people out there who are cleaning up those downed trees and putting the power lines back up and trying to get all those people's power restored. 800,000 people is not a small number of power to be restored, especially in places where they're not used to it. Kathy Hochul, the governor of New York, called this an Arctic siege, and she's right. And what we see, I think, and what we need to be prepared for is more and more of these Arctic blasts. It is colder now in Chicago and Indianapolis, significantly colder than it is in Anchorage, Alaska. And so when the president and this administration makes light of climate change, they really are shortchanging the American public, because we need to be prepared for a lot more of this kind of extreme weather, the kind that a lot of places just aren't prepared for. And the Weather Service cuts are definitely impacting the Weather Service, and we can talk about that.
Well, yeah, hold on to that, because I have a question for you on budget cuts. But you mentioned the administration, and I saw this post from the president last week. This was on the 3 days ago. The president on Truth Social: record cold wave expected to hit 40 states, he wrote. Rarely seen anything like it before. Could the environmental insurrectionists please explain whatever happened to global warming? I don't know if you're an environmental insurrectionist, but the president is obviously trying to get to something that's a matter of semantics here, correct? I mean, if we talk about global warming, you could call it climate change or whatever. Why don't you go ahead?
He is. And I'm a realist. I'm someone who looks at the facts. And the fact is that our global climate has been warming. And last year, we just got the information out of NOAA, kind of quietly. They snuck it out the door. It was the third warmest year in the U.S. on record. And after the last 2 years, which were 1 and 2. So the last 10 have been the warmest. What that means is incredible shifts in climate. So one of the reasons this storm was so powerful was because it was supercharged by warm ocean air. And that's why it was so wet and so extensive across the country. It's not these days, what weather and climate scientists are saying is that the storms that we're seeing are stronger, are wetter. And that's why we had so much ice, frankly. And that between the dip in the Arctic air that went all the way down to Louisiana and Texas and Tennessee in record low temperatures, and on top of that, a lot of moisture coming out of the Gulf, what you see is a huge storm that spanned thousands of miles. And so the president can pretend that climate change isn't happening, but it is. And Americans know it. That's the thing. They see it. It's like a lot of things he tries to spin, but you can't change what people see with their own eyes, what they experience. And so here we are. We need to be adapting to these things. We need to be prepared. And one of the reasons why I think the grid, you mentioned earlier that the grid had held up pretty well, was because we've seen this happen before, and we switched to a stronger grid with more renewable energy. Places like Texas, which had huge problems in 2021 with a similar storm, now have much more battery storage, much more solar and wind power. And so they were able to shift away from the more difficult types of power. But what people will see because of the really terrible policies of this administration is a rise in their electric power bills, because, as you also mentioned, natural gas prices going up, electricity demand through the roof at a time like this. We've taken power projects out of line. We've taken them offline, the ones that were coming online, that were going to help relieve some of the strain on the system during these cold spells. So the policies of this administration have been really a disaster, and make really
Monica, I
challenging
want to
weather
ask you
like
about
this,
the
much
budget
worse.
cuts at NOAA. I clearly you're not a fan of the administration. I just want to know more specifically about the cuts to NOAA, following the cuts we saw from the Doge, and now these proposed, I believe, roughly 30% cuts. It's a $1.7 billion
Yep.
cut to the National Oceanic and
Yep.
Atmospheric Administration. Where would that leave the agency in 2026?
That will leave the agency really strapped. Listen, the Weather Service, which is kind of the basic service that every American relies on, that the government provides on a daily routine basis, is four things. It's people. They've cut people. They've cut important people. They've cut years of experience. So even if they try to hire back some of those people, they won't be able to get back people with the kind of experience that they've lost. They've cut the amount of data we're collecting. You know, these little weather balloons, people talk about them. Offices used to put those up in the atmosphere every day, like clockwork, routinely, and that collected basic data that made our models better. And we don't do that as much anymore. There are lots of holes in our data now. That's going to make these forecasts less accurate. On top of that, we're cutting the science, the analysis of the data. It's not science for science sake. It's science so that we can get these forecasts right, so we can give people the kind of advance warning they had on this one, which was a massive storm. But what if it's a flash flood? What if it's a fire and wind, right? We need that data and the analysis that makes our models stronger. And then we need to collaborate with the private sector. And they're cutting the research centers, the places where that collaboration happens. So it's devastating what's going on at NOAA. And even if, which the House did put back money so that NOAA would be fully funded, I'm not sure this administration will follow the Congress's direction and actually fully fund all those programs and offices and people.